courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that makes you feel like something is about to explode. Sunlight streamed in through tall, dusty windows, casting sharp lines across the wooden floor. In the far corner, a uniformed officer sat with his arms crossed. His chest puffed out as if the badge pinned there was more than just metal, as if it was a shield that made him immune to consequence. His name was Detective Carl Mendez, and for years he had carried himself like the rules didn't apply to him. In the city's police circles, people either feared him or owed him favors. He had built a career not just on solving cases, but on bending the truth, intimidating witnesses, and pushing anyone who got in his way into the shadows. Carl's smirk that morning was as deliberate as the way he leaned back in his seat, one ankle resting casually on the opposite knee. He wasn't just confident, he was convinced of his invincibility. The trial, in his mind, was nothing more than a formality. A woman had accused him of misconduct, claiming he'd used his power to destroy her life. He had laughed when the summons arrived, tossing it onto his desk like junk mail. To him, she was just another civilian who didn't understand how the system worked. A system that, as far as Carl was concerned, belonged to men like him. He had dealt with people like her before. They came in full of fire and outrage, and left broken, exhausted, or too afraid to keep fighting. That woman's name was Emily Ward. When Emily walked into the courtroom, there was nothing meek about her. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to impress or intimidate. A simple navy blue blazer, a neat ponytail, and eyes that locked on Carl as if she'd been rehearsing for this moment for years. She carried a thick folder under one arm and the faintest trace of a smile, the kind that says, "I know something you don't." Carl's smirk deepened when he saw her. This is it, he thought. This was supposed to be the woman who could bring him down. She looked too calm, too ordinary. He figured she'd crumble before the first cross-examination was over. The judge entered, the bailiff called the room to order, and the proceedings began. Carl didn't even glance at the jury. He didn't need to. In his mind, all that mattered was making Emily look like a liar. He had done this dance countless times before. But Emily's opening statement was not what anyone expected. She didn't start with accusations or emotional pleas. She didn't cry or raise her voice. She told a story, a precise, detailed account of an evening 2 years ago when her younger brother, Daniel, had been arrested on suspicion of burglary. She described the way Carl had led the charge, showing up at their apartment without a warrant, rifling through their things, and threatening Daniel with prison time unless he confessed to a crime he didn't commit. Carl leaned back, expression unreadable, but inside he felt a flicker of irritation. Most people didn't remember details the way she did. They forgot, misremembered, got flustered. But Emily's words were sharp and deliberate, each one slotting into place like pieces of a puzzle. She went on to explain how, after Daniel refused to sign a confession, Carl had kept him in holding for 2 nights without cause, cutting off access to a lawyer. How Carl had later found evidence. A watch in Daniel's backpack, a watch Emily swore had never been there before. Carl had heard all this before, of course. She'd filed complaints. Internal Affairs had investigated. Nothing had come of it because Carl had friends in the right places and a spotless official record. He had every confidence this time would be no different. But then Emily began producing documents. Emails between Carl and a pawn shop owner, dated just before the watch appeared in Daniel's bag. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showing Carl leaving the shop carrying something small wrapped in a paper bag. And then the bombshell, a sworn affidavit from another officer who had been there that night, stating that Carl had planted the evidence himself. Carl's jaw tightened. That affidavit hadn't been in the pretrial discovery. How had she gotten it? Emily never broke eye contact with him as she spoke, as if daring him to interrupt. The room seemed to lean in, the jury hanging on every word. When Carl's attorney cross-examined her, she was steady. She didn't get rattled when they accused her of lying, didn't flinch when they implied she was doing this for attention or revenge. She simply repeated her answers, each one reinforced by another piece of evidence. Carl kept telling himself it didn't matter. Evidence could be discredited. Witnesses could be undermined. He had done it before. But deep down, An unease began to grow. This wasn't going to be as simple as he thought. During the recess, Carl stood near the window in the hallway, staring out at the street but not really seeing it. His lawyer was talking in a low voice, outlining strategies for the afternoon session, but Carl wasn't listening. His mind kept replaying that affidavit. He needed to know who had betrayed him. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Emily's voice was calm but laced with steel. "You've hidden behind that badge for a long time, detective, but you can't hide from the truth forever." Carl turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "You think you know the game you're playing," he said, his tone almost amused. "But I've been in it a lot longer than you. People like you burn out fast." She didn't blink. "The thing about fire," she replied, "is it spreads." The bailiff called them back in, but Carl felt something he hadn't felt in years: uncertainty. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showing Carl leaving the shop carrying something small wrapped in a paper bag. And then the bombshell, a sworn affidavit from another officer who had been there that night, stating that Carl had planted the evidence himself. Carl's jaw tightened. That affidavit hadn't been in the pretrial discovery. How had she gotten it? Emily never broke eye contact with him as she spoke, as if daring him to interrupt. The room seemed to lean in, the jury hanging on every word. When Carl's attorney cross-examined her, she was steady. She didn't get rattled when they accused her of lying, didn't flinch when they implied she was doing this for attention or revenge. She simply repeated her answers, each one reinforced by another piece of evidence. Carl kept telling himself it didn't matter. Evidence could be discredited. Witnesses could be undermined. He had done it before. But deep down, an unease began to grow. This wasn't going to be as simple as he thought. During the recess, Carl stood near the window in the hallway, staring out at the street but not really seeing it. His lawyer was talking in a low voice, outlining strategies for the afternoon session, but Carl wasn't listening. His mind kept replaying that affidavit. He needed to know who had betrayed him. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Emily's voice was calm but laced with steel. "You've hidden behind that badge for a long time, detective, but you can't hide from the truth forever." Carl turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "You think you know the game you're playing," he said, his tone almost amused. "But I've been in it a lot longer than you. People like you burn out fast." She didn't blink. "The thing about fire," she replied, "is it spreads." The bailiff called them back in, but Carl felt something he hadn't felt in years: uncertainty. That afternoon, the prosecution called their next witness, Officer James Calder, a man Carl had known for nearly a decade. Calder had been in Carl's squad, part of his inner circle. If anyone could shut down Emily's case, it was him. But Calder didn't look at Carl as he took the stand. He didn't greet him, didn't nod. When the prosecutor began questioning him, Calder's voice was steady, and every word he spoke was another nail in Carl's armor. He confirmed that the watch had been planted. He confirmed that Carl had ordered him to keep the kid locked up until he confessed. He confirmed that Carl had threatened him into silence afterward. The jury shifted in their seats. Carl could feel the weight of their eyes. His lawyer objected repeatedly, but most were overruled. By the time Calder stepped down, Carl's confidence had cracked. He forced himself to sit still, to keep that same smug posture, but his mind was racing. Calder had always been loyal. Why now? Why side with her? As the day ended and the judge dismissed them until morning, Carl walked out of the courtroom into the fading light. Emily passed him without a word, but there was that same faint smile, the one that now felt less like confidence and more like a warning. For the first time, Carl wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had brought the wrong woman to court. Carl didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment, the blinds drawn, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating on the table. The city outside was alive with distant sirens and muffled traffic, but inside, the air was thick with a kind of quiet that gnawed at him. He'd always been able to shut out the noise, the complaints, the accusations, the angry families, but now the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. He replayed the day's events over and over. Calder's testimony had been the real knife in the ribs. He'd expected loyalty, but Calder had looked him dead in the eye and told the court everything. Carl knew there had to be a reason. No one betrayed him without an angle. Someone had gotten to him, someone with enough leverage to crack even a decade of camaraderie. At 2 a.m., Carl picked up his phone and scrolled to Calder's number. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he stopped. Calder wouldn't talk. Not now. Not after what he'd done in court. He'd lawyered up, probably had protection. That left only one real target, Emily. He lit a cigarette and sat back, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. He needed to know what she had, who she had, and how she had pulled Calder out from under him. He wasn't just going to fight her in court. He was going to dismantle her piece by piece. The next morning, Carl walked into the courthouse in a perfectly pressed suit, his face unreadable. Cameras flashed, reporters called out questions, but he ignored them. Emily was already inside, seated at the plaintiff's table, flipping through papers. She didn't look up when he entered, but Carl could feel the awareness between them like an electric wire. The judge called the court to order, and the day's proceedings began. This time, Emily started by introducing financial records, not Carl's, but those of the pawn shop owner he'd been linked to in the surveillance footage. The records showed a series of cash deposits that lined up exactly with dates from old cases Carl had worked on, cases where evidence had conveniently appeared at just the right moment to secure convictions. Carl's lawyer objected, arguing irrelevance, but the judge allowed it. The jurors leaned forward. Emily's voice was calm, deliberate, and every new exhibit was like a quiet hammer blow. Then she called the pawn shop owner to the stand. The man looked nervous, but his answers were clear. Yes, Carl had brought him items. Yes, he'd been paid to hold them until Carl needed them found in an investigation. Yes, he'd been threatened once when he considered refusing. Carl sat still, but inside he felt something cold spreading through his chest. The man was telling the truth. And worse, he had proof. Receipts, signatures, even the security footage. During the cross-examination, Carl's lawyer tried to paint the pawn shop owner as unreliable, a criminal looking to save himself. But the jury wasn't buying it. Carl could see it in their faces, that subtle shift when doubt starts to harden into belief. After lunch, Emily brought in her final witness. And when the door opened, Carl froze. It was Lydia Mason. She had been a rookie detective once, years ago, assigned to Carl's unit. She'd lasted less than 6 months before filing for a transfer. He'd barely thought of her since, until now. Lydia took the stand, her posture straight, her voice clear. She spoke about intimidation, falsified reports, and unspoken rules in Carl's unit. She told the jury how she'd seen him threaten suspects, manipulate evidence, and use his badge like a weapon. Carl's jaw tightened. Lydia was articulate, controlled, and everything she said chipped away at the image he had built for himself. When she described the night Daniel Ward had been arrested, her account lined up perfectly with Emily's, down to the moment Carl had slipped something into the boy's bag. The witnesses, but because Emily Ward hadn't flinched. Not once. He thought about what she'd said in the hallway. The thing about fire is it spreads. The verdict came the next afternoon. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, and the words hit like a punch. Guilty on multiple counts. Evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Carl didn't move as the judge read the sentencing date. He didn't react when the bailiffs came to take him into custody. The badge that had once been his shield was gone, replaced by cold metal cuffs that bit into his wrists. As they led him past Emily, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked at him with the same calm, steady eyes she'd had from the start. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, shoving microphones in her face. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying over the noise. "This was never just about my brother," she said. "It was about every person who was silenced, every family torn apart because someone thought a badge made them untouchable. No one is above the law." Carl heard her words echo in his head long after they loaded him into the van. For years, he'd believed the system was his to control. But in the end, It was the truth, steady, patient, unyielding, that had brought him down.